Hello, hi everyone, and welcome to Skill Sessions. Thank you very much for joining us for the final webinar of 2024. Some of you have started doing this already, but please say hello in the chat and let me know where you're joining from. It's one of my favourite things to see just how far and wide our attendees are located. Also, let me know if you're new to Skill Sessions or whether you've been with us before as well. So where have we got people joining from? Caroline from Lancashire. Hi, Caroline. Rebecca from Wigan. James from Bristol. I'm also in Bristol, so hi, James. London, Southeast London. Oh my gosh, there's a flurry of messages. Stevie, I think you joined the last event, Stevie. Hello again. A happy returnee. We love to see it. Keep those messages coming into the chat, folks. So today's session, we are welcoming back a very familiar face, Dr. Richard Purcell. So if you're a long-time attendee of Skill Sessions, you will know that Rich used to host these webinars. He's also the founder of CareScribe, and we are the organisation that hosts and puts these events together. Joining him will also be Elle Chappell and Jane McColl, and they form the people team at CareScribe, and they will all be joining us today as a collective to talk about how to get leadership to support neuroinclusion efforts within your organisation. But before I introduce the panel, and they join me on screen today, I just want to welcome you all to Skill Sessions and to let you know what to expect. So whether you are brand new to this webinar series or if you've been with us before, welcome and thank you so much for coming along. So we've been running these free online events for over a year now, and there is now a community of over 2,000 of you, which is amazing. So thank you so much for being a part of the Skill Sessions community that we've built up over the last 15 months. The objective of these events is to bring you experts and speakers on a range of topics around inclusion and neurodiversity in the workplace. You can always find the latest events on the CareScribe website or by following CareScribe on LinkedIn. And we also have all of our past event recordings available for you to watch back at your leisure on the website, where we have the transcript, summaries, and additional resources for you to explore. So I think a member of the CareScribe team is going to pop a link to that in the chat so that you can save it for later. So who are we? Who are CareScribe? Well, we're the organisation that makes these events happen. We're an award-winning software company based in Bristol, and we create assistive tech to help people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities to be more productive and confident in their work or in their studies. So we have two products. Captioned, which is note-taking and captioning software, which helps people capture and comprehend just the piles of information which gets thrown at them either at work or in education. And we have TalkType, which is incredibly accurate, lightning-fast dictation software, which works across all platforms, so Mac, Windows, Chromebook, and mobile. So if you're joining this call today and you want to know any more about these products to find out how they can support your workforce or even your students, just drop a message in the chat and one of the team will reach out after the session. Okay, before I introduce you to our speakers, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So, towards the end of the session, there will be a feedback survey in the chat, and this is where you can let us know how you found the webinar, and you can also request a certificate of attendance too. As you'll notice from the start of this call, I really do encourage you to join the chat and to talk with other people on the call. Like I said, we've been doing these events for months now, and that's really where sort of the magic happens. It's in that conversation within the chat panel. So I would encourage you to share your experiences in the chat, because I think you'll get more from the call. However, I do appreciate that sometimes that can be a bit distracting. So if you need to, you can turn off chat previews and you can mute your chat notifications. So just a reminder that functionality exists for you to make use of. Today we have a panel, and if you have any questions for our panel, again, I do encourage you to ask questions to our panel. Please put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to point at the bottom of the screen. Put them in the Q&A section rather than in the chat. And the reason for this is you will notice the chat gets quite busy, and it means that I can keep track of the questions if you put them in the Q&A section. It also means that questions can be upvoted, so I know which ones to tackle as a priority and which ones to put to our lovely speakers. And then probably the question which we get asked the most, which is this webinar being recorded? And the answer is yes. You'll be sent a follow-up email tomorrow with a recording and a full transcript, which has been generated by Captioned. Whew. That's enough from me. It's time to introduce you to today's panel. So joining me today are some people that I'm very familiar with, as they are friends and colleagues at CareScribe. So we have Dr. Richard Purcell, aka Rich, and he is the co-founder of CareScribe, and he himself is neurodivergent. We have CareScribe's People Director, Elle Chappell, and our Senior People Manager, Jane McColl. So I'm going to invite them to join me on screen, and then I'll give you a very brief introduction to them all. Hello, everyone. Hi. So Rich is an NHS doctor and an entrepreneur who spent his career developing assistive tech to help support disabled and neurodivergent people at work and in education. His experience includes several years of clinical practice in the NHS and overseas, Australia, I believe. And he has also established and grown two successful tech companies, McColl and CareScribe. Elle is a senior business leader and our people director here at CareScribe, and she's spent several years working with a range of businesses, advising boards and executive teams through times of transition and growth to make really impactful business change. And she's responsible for the creation and delivery of the people strategy at CareScribe, ensuring that we're focusing on the right things at the right time for the organisation. And finally, we have our senior people manager, Jane McColl, who has worked in HR teams within global organisations for over 15 years. And Jane is incredibly passionate about changing the face of HR through thoughtful, kind, and authentic people-focused initiatives. So hopefully what those little introductions have shown you is, if anyone can talk to us and teach us today about how to get neuroinclusion a seat at the board table, it's these three. So let's get stuck in. Hello, I'm going to ask all of you to introduce yourselves and to tell me a little bit more about why you're joining the panel today. Rich, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers, Claire. I don't know how I can, beat that introduction. Yes, I'm Rich. I'm one of the founders and directors of CareScribe, and I think my sort of area of expertise is kind of multifaceted in lots of ways. So I got personal experience. I'm of neurodiversity, I suppose, as both dyslexic and having ADHD. And I've had to overcome lots of sort of challenges myself in both my career and my personal life relating to that. And I have both leaned on assistive technology and built assistive technology in order to help myself. I've had a medical career, so I'm a doctor by practice, as Claire said, and that comes with dealing with a wide variety of different people with different experiences at often vulnerable times of their life, and that brings with it a lot of learnings. And also, we built two assistive tech companies, so kind of know the assistive tech space and works with lots of people, individuals, and companies to deliver assistive technology solutions across organizations. So yeah, that's kind of my background and my insights, and hopefully I can bring a lot to the panel.
You definitely will, Rich. Thank you. Elle, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. A lot to follow there. Hi, everyone. Really, really great to have so many of you join us today. I'm Elle. I'm the People Director here at CareScribe. I have been in the people and talent space. I just counted this. I think it's coming on for 13 years in total, which seems quite a long time. But more latterly, in the last several years, I've spent my career working with a range of senior people, boards, execs, NEDs, startups, right up to sort of larger organisations. And I've interacted and observed these people and how they go around making decisions on what their priorities are for the new years ahead or their company strategy. So hopefully I'll be able to add some insight and some considerations to everyone on the call today for how to bring this really, really important subject to the attention of senior business leaders and getting it where it needs to be on company strategies. So yeah, hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining.
Jane, finally, Jane, tell us about why you're joining the panel today.
Thanks, Claire. So firstly, I'm going to share, this is my first webinar ever, so yay.
Exciting.
Bear with me. So my experience in neurodiversity and neuroinclusion is really rooted in working closely with managers at all levels. So I think you were kind to me with my years in your introduction of 15. It's a little bit longer than that, but we'll stick with 15. So it's a big part of my role is about embedding inclusion sort of like into the employee experience and sort of like throughout the employee life cycle. So, I'm experienced with helping managers better understand how they can support their teams by focusing on removing barriers and creating environments where everyone can thrive. This kind of includes, providing guidance on workplace adjustments, also advocating for open conversations, and really just like helping managers to feel supported in fostering neuroinclusive spaces. So so it's kind of pitted across my sort of like career, sort of like in how that I've been able to put those into place.
Thanks, Jane. So for people on the call, I guess lots of unique perspectives there, which will sort of guide the conversation as we go through the questions for the next sort of 45 minutes. Just so everyone on the call is on a level playing field as well. I'd like first to talk about what we mean when we say the word or the term neuroinclusion. And Rich, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that. What do we mean when we say neuroinclusion?
Yeah, sure, I can elaborate on it. So before I kind of dive into that question, just a bit of just a general disclaimer when it comes to kind of terminology, I suppose, which is when I think we talk about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, there's kind of the preferred language and terminology can kind of vary wildly, let's say, between across personal preferences, and the consensus can evolve over time. So while we kind of discuss both this and lots of things today, I'll do my best to kind of cover these topics and navigate them kind of thoughtfully and use the most inclusive language possible. But it sometimes can be challenging to find terms that resonate with everyone. So that does mean that if I kind of talk about ADHD and I use the term disorder, and in that context, you don't agree with that, please know that I'm not making a statement about the term. I'm just trying to make sure everybody recognizes the language that recognizes the thing I'm referring to. So bear with me, and I'll do my best to be kind of inclusive, but acknowledge that the language in this space can be sometimes a bit of a moving target. So Claire, your question was kind of terminology related, and it was about neuro inclusion and what kind of that means. So I think kind of fundamental to that is understanding neurodiversity, another kind of term that kind of goes along with it. And I'm sure most people are familiar with that, but just in case, that essentially is used to describe the kind of natural variation in brains that across a population. So everybody has a different brain, which means that we all have different thought processes and perceive the world kind of differently. And neuroinclusion really relates to acknowledging that and embracing neurodiversity within our behaviors. So if you apply that to kind of the workplace and neuroinclusion, in the workplace, it kind of refers to that intentional creation of environments, policies, practices that enable neurodivergent individuals to kind of thrive within a workspace. And really, it goes beyond just kind of acknowledging neurodiversity, but is about actively seeking to embrace and celebrate those differences as valuable contributions within an organization. So in order to do that, you kind of need to understand that traditional workspaces and workplaces and spaces and structures and expectations might not suit all minds equally. And then it involves making adjustments, whether that's kind of flexible work arrangements or assistive technologies or changing communication styles and alternative approaches to recruitment and career development, ultimately to kind of ensure that neurodivergent individuals and the kind of full range of brains and people that are working in your organization can kind of fully participate and excel. So yeah, that's kind of what neuroinclusion kind of means, or certainly means to me, especially when applied to kind of the workplace.
Lovely. Thank you for that definition, Rich. Nicely summarised. Okay, we're just about to get into the meat of the conversation, but just a reminder for people joining the call, if you have any questions for our panel, do our best to sort of visit those at the end. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to pose your questions to the panelists. And again, I just encourage you to use the chat to join in the conversation as well. So the first question for our panelists, and Elle, I'm going to direct this one to you. Why is creating neuroinclusive spaces so important for organisations today?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a number of reasons here, and more recently, in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, it's become more paramount that organisations do this. And I would say the reasons really span sort of ethical, moral, societal, and then commercial reasons. There's several buckets that it fits into. And I think organisations should actually see neurodivergent talent as a competitive advantage. Businesses spend a fortune and so much time trying to create that thing that puts them above all of their competition. It takes a lot of time, and not all businesses manage to successfully do it. And typically organisations have developed these practices that appeal to neurotypical people. Rich sort of just alluded to this in what he was just talking about. When it comes to hiring, for example, companies have typically cast the net wide and applied a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to hiring, and you typically end up hiring or attracting the same kind of people. And it's really widely known that this reduces the thing that that businesses spend time and money on to stay ahead of the competition, which is the word that we all love to use so much is innovation. Businesses need to innovate, otherwise they stand still. But by doing what you've always done, it's that classic phrase, you'll get the same result. So if we're thinking about it from this sort of really commercial angle, obviously the others are highly important as well, the sort of ethical, moral and societal angles. By investing in that neurodivergent talent and adjusting those hiring practices and adjusting how we are assessing talent and, you know, looking at performance and things, what you're actually doing is cultivating a really rich talent pool within your organisation. And that will very quickly start to show to your customer base. So if we're thinking about our customer bases, whether you're a sort of B2B or B2C organisation, your customers are not going to be one group of people. Your customers are highly likely to you know, have a really, really broad span of people and brains, to use Rich's term earlier, in your customer base. So by investing in your business and in your people in your organisation, you will only see results commercially as well. So again, in market share, and again pointing towards that sort of competitive advantage that all businesses are trying to create. So it's highly important, and yeah, we could spend much longer than a few minutes talking about this particular question itself, for sure.
I think that those things that you just discussed there, Alex, I was making some notes as you were talking, will crop up quite a lot throughout this conversation. You know, you talked about not only like the sort of the ethics and the morality around it, but also like the commercial stuff. And like the conversation today really is about getting buy-in from the leadership team. And I think using language like competitive advantage and commercial, like that's what will sort of capture the attention of the leadership team when you're advocating that within a larger business. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more there. The sort of follow-up question I have for that then, Al, for you, Al, is, you know, embracing neuroinclusion. What, you know, we've talked about all of these wonderful things that it can provide for businesses, you know, a richer talent pool, that sort of commercial advantage that you spoke about. What are the biggest barriers then, if those are the rewards, what's the biggest barriers for senior leadership in embracing neuroinclusion?
Yeah, another great question. I think there are multiple barriers. I think there's a fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. People don't want to upset or offend people. I think there's also a fear of what risk would we be at by doing or saying the wrong thing. So I think they're pretty big. I also think there's not enough understanding of the positive impact it can actually have on an organisation. So I think there's a huge educational piece that is missing as well. From observations over the last several years, I think there's some ROI concerns. So if you've got your New Year's agenda ahead of you and you're mapping out all of your budgets, investing in neuroinclusion, it's not a quick win. It's more of a long-term commercial investment. And I think some senior leaders can often prioritise quick wins over long-term cultural change in an organisation, especially in tougher climates. We're in one of those now, and it's all around kind of ROI now. What can we get? So I think those are some of the biggest challenges. I also think staying with that kind of ROI thread, measuring the impact of EDI and neuroinclusion isn't always as easy as measuring the impact of an investment in, say, lead generation software. And I'm just pulling that one out there because it's very, very, very easy to measure the impact of that. So when these senior leaders have got all of these priorities that they're getting from their heads of department and they're trying to weigh up the ROI and the budget and what they focus on, I think that absolutely causes a barrier as well for businesses. So a range of things, I think, all contribute to it. I think education is going to be really key, and as much information as companies can absorb on this topic, the better, for sure.
Yeah, and I am biased here, but that's one of the reasons why we created skill sessions to sort of advocate and to accelerate that education piece, because it is so needed. For everyone that's watching as well on the call, I'm curious to know whether any of the points that Elle just made resonated with you, whether those are patterns or themes that you're noticing within your workplace as well. So do just let us know in the chat if that's something that you've observed as well, or likewise if there's any other sort of challenges that you have within your business for gaining sort of leadership buy-in to neuroinclusion. Final question, which I'm going to again pose to you, Elle, which is what is the risk then for businesses that fail to invest in those neuro-inclusive practices?
Yeah, I've probably covered a couple of these already, but for the obvious ones really are stifled innovation, which is the opposite of what any organisation wants. When you come to thinking about restricting yourself to that sort of talent pool, it's that kind of very one-way thinking, which takes longer to get to the end goal, if that's the way that you operate and think within an organisation. There's that sort of groupthink risk there. And it's that phrase, which is one of my pet hate phrases, and it's, well, we've always done it like this. Hire the same people, get the same results. So a huge risk is that sort of commercial innovation risk. And then we've really got the morals and ethics side. I think businesses now, look at B Corp, for example, businesses are volunteering or opting to hold themselves to a higher standard, and they also want to work with organisations that operate in the same way. And I think your businesses will struggle to recruit if they're not seen to be making these changes. But I think it could also impact them in terms of with their customer base as well, and how they're actually perceived externally in their marketplace. So the two pretty big ones there. And then, you've got everything that sort of props it all up. You've got your legal risks and things like that start getting pretty messy and complicated and possibly very costly for organisations. So I would bucket it into the commercial aspects, the innovation, your customer base, hiring and retention, and then those the sort of legal implications as well. So linking it back to what I was talking about earlier, the sort of competitive advantage. If you make the right decisions around this and really embrace it, I think the possibilities are just really positive and possibly endless as well.
100%. Elle, I know that you can't see comments in the chat, but we've had Kathleen say, so all of those sort of blockers and challenges that you talked about, they've also seen in their workplace. They've had recent discussions about how accessible some of their offices are, which hasn't previously been discussed, but Kathleen does acknowledge that progress takes time as well. I think that's true for most things, isn't it? They just don't happen overnight.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's about managing expectations as well. I think typically leaders of business, they want that quick, like you said, quick action, quick ROI.
Yeah. What do we get now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it takes time. It takes time.
Yeah. Good things come to those who wait. There's the phrase.
Rich and Jane, I'd love to invite you to contribute to that question as well. Rich, I noticed you've unmuted yourself, so
no, I was kind of nodding along. I think one of the key bits which links into a lot of what I was talking about is kind of trying to move away from the notion that neuroinclusion accessibility is all about kind of it's the nice thing to do. It's a nice to have. It's kind of getting that warm fuzzy feeling and actually saying, no, this can be a commercial decision. It's like got clear competitive advantages that are going to move you towards kind of achieving your business goals. I think when you look at kind of like the risks of not investing in neuroinclusive practices, for me, it kind of boils down to like two things. One is failing to unlock the full potential of your workforce. And there is, listen to anything in the news, it's all about productivity at the moment, right? And as it should be, we need to be more productive generally as a workforce, and you want to unlock the potential that is already existing in our teams. And it's also about limiting access to incredible talent that's out there. So if you're not being neuroinclusive, you're limiting who's likely to come and want to work with you, and all that incredible talent that those people bring. And to kind of, I guess, elaborate on that. Not creating an inclusive environment. You're kind of you've already invested so much in your workforce, and you're just limiting the returns of that investment, essentially. So I think the key thing is to try and move away from this kind of warm, fluffy feeling and more towards kind of the commercial aspects. I mean, there's loads and loads of data out there that show the commercial output of neuroinclusive businesses. So like Deloitte did a really good study not very long ago. I can't remember the date, but it wasn't very long ago, and it showed two times increase in likelihood to exceed financial targets in neuroinclusive organizations, 3 times increase in performance, and 8 times increase in ability to achieve outcomes. And it's a huge study, and it's really, really interesting. I will link it afterwards, but it's super interesting. But it clearly shows neuroinclusion equals better performance, essentially.
Yeah, nice. Yes, please do share the link to that resource, Rich, because that sounds great. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that I was just talking about around that ROI and those data points. So again, I know that you can't see the chat panelists on the call, but someone else has also said within their business, they just see these patterns of a lack of understanding or a lack of interest, actually, regarding neuroinclusion, and a reluctance to invest time or resources to accommodate different needs. So actually, I think that Deloitte resource would be really useful to share with the people of this call, Rich, just to help sort of advocate for the positive impact that it can have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's all the sort of the legal ramifications of not embracing inclusion and accessibility, and all of that is very true. But I think if we're focusing on sort of the true impact of neuroinclusion, the positive impact, I think and there's so much data out there about it as well.
And it's interesting to hear your input on that, Rich, because you are the owner of a business. So that's speaking your language. So yeah, really interesting to have that insight from you. Elle, another one for you. And this question is about how organizations can get buy-in from leadership for neuroinclusion. So I know we sort of danced around the topic a little bit over the last few minutes, but would love to hear from you. And then also, again, Jane and Rich, if you have any other contributions that you'd like to make to answering this question. It's how do organizations get buy-in from leadership for neuroinclusion? Al, can you take that one first?
Yeah, it's really similar to getting buy-in from anything that you're trying to get your leadership team to embrace and support. And it's speaking the language of the people that you're operating with, so your board or your execs, and finding out what is important to those different people. The language the CTO speaks is going to be totally different to the language your CFO speaks. They care about numbers. Typically, we would like to think they would. Margins, the P&L. By speaking the language of your CFO, for example, and talking about actually by not investing in neuroinclusion, you're potentially hindering growth instead of actually, 5xing or 6xing our performance based on this data. You could reference the Deloitte white paper that Rich has just talked about. Talk about market share to them, all these kinds of things that the CFO cares about. Talk to them about decreased talent costs, replacing people just costs loads of money, but by actually changing our hiring practices and our processes to be inclusive, we're reducing wasted cost and actually getting a really diverse talent pool that will then spark innovative practice. So it's about speaking the language. If you're speaking to the CEO, the things the CEOs typically care about, obviously the numbers as well. I would like to think so. Reputation, credibility, lagging behind competitors, productivity and performance. These are just some of the core things that CEOs care about. And again, find out what it is that really makes them tick and translate that to the thing that they care about. And again, just keep on tying it back in with this is what we can have in those areas that you really care about by us investing in this now. And of course, like I just said, share some data and share some numbers. There is so much out there, like Rich said, and organisations like Deloitte, one of the big four, known globally, investing a lot of money into white papers like this and these kinds of pieces of research. It only goes to show that it's true and it's real. So yes, speak their language and talk their talk and find out what they care about and start going in from that angle is probably what I would suggest.
Wonderful practical tips, Al. Thank you. You mentioned you kept mentioning the word data there, and Rich, you also talked about the Deloitte white paper. So, Rich, maybe this is one that you can take initially, but why is data so important? How can data and how can metrics help make the business case for neuroinclusion?
Yeah, I think exactly what Elle said is, you're talking you need to talk the language of the board. You need to, it's a sales process, essentially. You're trying to sell, sell neuroinclusion upstairs, essentially. So you need to talk that language, and then you need to build trust, and data helps to evidence what you're saying and helps to build that trust that it is the right decision to go with. So, really, really practical. I would try and be really practical. And again, neuroinclusion shouldn't be pitched as kind of the nice thing to do. It can be absolutely a data-driven initiative, and the leadership and the board are going to be much more interested if you come with clear data that links back to the KPIs that they're most interested in. And everybody wants to look good to their boss. Everybody has something that they're trying to meet, a KPI that they're trying to meet, and you need to know what that is, and then you need to pitch towards it. And the great thing is, neuroinclusion is the most sellable and flexible thing that you can if you want to talk about improved reduced staff attrition or improved productivity, you can flex it to any of these kind of KPIs. So really kind of practically, I would always start with kind of trying to show the scale of the impact. Try and get rid of that assumption that neuroinclusion doesn't exist in our organization, or neurodiversity. Yes, that maybe we haven't hired anybody like that. That sort of notion. You need to get rid of that. And ultimately, if your organization is more than one person, it is neurodiverse, right? Two brains, they're different. It's neurodiverse. So you have a neurodiverse organization as long as you're more than one person. And then you can either use population data, so Googleable information to say 15 to 20% of people in our organization are likely to be neurodivergent, or you can use survey results and disclosure forms and things to sort of hone in on your specific organization. Although we know disclosure can be a challenge depending on the sort of state of your organization, and particularly around psychological safety. So I'd usually, even if you've got survey and organization specific information, I'd also lean on population data as well, because you're often, unless you're doing absolutely fantastically, you're probably going to find it's underrepresented as in your organization as part of the whole population. And then I would tie whatever neuroinclusion initiative I'm wanting to drive to the metrics that the leadership cares about. So to those KPIs, if it's productivity, how much more effective could your workforce be if neurodivergent employees had the tools and accommodations tailored to their needs? If it's retention, what is the cost of losing employees who feel unsupported, and how can neuroinclusive practices reduce that turnover? If it's satisfaction, how does neuroinclusion impact engagement scores and NPS scores and things like that for overall employee satisfaction? And we do this all the time with clients where they're interested in a neuroinclusion initiative, and it may involve the technology accommodation for staff, and that might be one of our softwares like Captioned and or TalkType, and we will work with them in order to try and set out that kind of business case. So it might be to say X percentage of your workforce is neurodiverse, and again that can be population data or disclosure figures or a combination of both. So you're demonstrating scale. You set out the challenge or the KPI that you're looking to meet. So it might be, about, let's say Captioned, for example, it's about helping people to comprehend and retain information. So you can show research to say, well, neurodivergent employees retain less information in traditional meeting formats, and that can impact productivity. And then you can propose your solution. So you can say Captioned can improve comprehension and retention of information by 30%. And you can then translate that into the figures, whether that's pound signs, dollar signs, or reduced staff attrition rates, or satisfaction scores, what have you, to be able to say, oh, look, and this is the impact. And then what's really good if you then reassure, you can reassure further by saying, oh, and this is kind of my assertion as to the benefits, but let's plan to measure success. So let's come back and measure it afterwards and say, oh, what's been a success? So pre and post implementation, what success looks like. So I'd really have that kind of that structure to show scale of the impact, link it to those kind of initiative, link the initiative to those kind of KPIs that most matter. Be data driven. There's so much data out there. All you need to do is go into Google Scholar, start having a look around, and there's almost always academic papers that tie into what you're looking for, and then I'd always sort of add that level of reassurance that you want to go back and measure the success of your initiative, because that, if nothing else, puts a bit more onus on you. It's kind of you're taking a bit of the weight of the responsibility for the success. So that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, I think the point you make around measuring success is so important. It's a question that I ask sort of my team quite a lot. So I think as a leader, that's quite an important thing to sort of demonstrate. If you're the person going in asking for neuroinclusive support or to support an initiative, how you will demonstrate and measure success will go in with that, I think, as a suggestion, because it will just it would from my own experience, that's a really lovely thing for people to be forthcoming with. I'm really conscious, Jane, that we haven't heard from you yet, so I'm going to fire a question your way, if that's okay. Yeah. So Jane, what role does the senior leadership team or the C-suite play in building a really neuro-inclusive culture in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question, Claire, and going to be quite different, I think, from what's been discussed already. So the softer side. So yeah, building a neuro-inclusive culture really starts with senior leadership role modeling inclusive behaviours, which is really important, helping to like create the psychological safety across the organisation. So when leaders like openly share their own experiences, it sets the tone for an environment where others feel safe to do the same. And that's really sort of like sparkling like the ripple effect of openness and trust. So this can happen in a lot of ways. So that can either be through like one-on-one conversations, sharing personal stories, sort of like in company-wide comms, such as all hands that we have, or newsletters, or even using sort of like external platforms like LinkedIn, to advocate for change. So it's putting themselves kind of like out there. So sharing lived experiences can be powerful in ways to connect with others and highlight like the need for inclusivity. So it doesn't stop there, because I was thinking this through, and it's kind of like that's kind of like the start. Role modeling also means about like seeking feedback, so being really open to learning. We're not expecting everyone to know everything, and I think it was Elle mentioned earlier on. There's that fear factor. So if there's a fear factor, sometimes it's just easier just to pop it over there and, I'm not sure, I don't really understand it. I don't want to make a mistake, so I'm just not going to do anything about it. But it's about being open to learning and to learn from the people that you manage, and to listen without judgment. So what I've just said there is about being vulnerable and sort of saying, I don't have all the answers. Let's work together, and let's find a way that works for you. So yeah, creating psychological safety is really important for leaders to also back up their words with action. So there's a lot about sort of talking about it, but it's about making it sort of real as well, so that people can see things happening. So really it's about moving away from the awareness to tangible actions that really do drive those changes in your culture.
Actions rather than just words sort of speaks volumes, doesn't it? And actually, psychological safety is a theme that's come up quite frequently when we host these skill sessions events, Jane. So yes, I really agree with your sort of angle there. Role modeling that behavior as a leadership team just invites and encourages people to take action to build that sort of neuro-inclusive culture. Talked a lot about like senior leaders during this conversation, but how can organizations equip people managers to better support neuroinclusion, like on the front line, Jane?
Yeah, no, that's another good question. The thing that I've seen a lot of really is around like diagnosis and disclosure. Those can be some of the biggest barriers that managers face in sort of knowing, how can I support, or even having the information to do that. So there's ways that you can kind of like support your managers to look at ways of breaking this down, thinking about kind of like resources to support people through the employee life cycle. So some of the things that we've been doing here, so if we look at our recruitment process, we provide everybody with like the interview structure and questions in advance. So I've seen a lot recently. I know we've had a conversation with AXA, so like just recently regarding this, where there are times when people sort of like need to ask for that accommodation. So what we do there is we, remove the need to even ask for the adjustment, because we apply that to everybody. And as Rich said, if you've got more than one brain in an organization, then you're neurodiverse. So we found this created a really great space for people to share their experiences. So like enabling the managers to connect right from the very beginning, building that trust in the relationship right from the outset. And we've had some great feedback from people who've recently gone through the recruitment process. So that kind of like then rolls into onboarding. So we ask everyone sort of like who go through the onboarding experience to share about how they work best. So this is another resource that you can kind of give to your managers, where it's like a series of questions that cover things such as communication style, meetings, how do you like to give and receive feedback? Everyone's different. So again, it started off sort of like where we were just using that for people who were neurodivergent, but now we sort of like give that to everybody, because again, we all work differently, and it's about getting the best out of everyone. So we find this provides like managers with an initial insight into how they can adjust like their management style and consider sort of like different ways of working rather than imposing one way. And I've seen myself in previous roles where I've had frustrations with sometimes like trying to get that message across to a manager, where it's like, but I treat everybody in the team like this, so why should I be treating this person in this way? Surely that's not fair on the others. And there's a real kind of like education piece there where, you know, again, reaching out to your people teams, your HR teams to support, to navigate through that, because it is difficult. It is a minefield. There was something I wanted to share here that it actually came from our Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which was back in March, I think. And this is an example of where a manager just adjusted their style completely. So they had somebody in their team that would often not log in onto a meeting on time, or either completely forget or come in late. And that was part of that sort of like, you know, processing and planning and sorting those things out. So that manager knew that was an issue for that person. So they actually, I don't know the technical side of things, but they actually found a way where they could just automatically get that person into the meeting. It'll pop up on their screen, and then they're like, oh, hello. So they were there at their desk working, and then they go straight in. And I just remember coming away from that thinking, amazing, because it was such a small, tiny thing. And we've been talking a lot about, you know, cost and ROI and all those sorts of things, but there's so many changes that you can make that don't cost anything, that has such an impact because the person feels seen and heard. Another way is signposting. So signposting is a great way to support your managers with access to work and making sure that they're aware and understand like the resources and the funding that they can sort of seek from that. That again, Rich has talked through sort of like, you know, captioning and dictation tools. And those are the sorts of things that can really support where managers aren't going to be able to put that sort of in place. So, you know, a key takeaway for me when I was looking, you know, putting this together is, if you don't know, then ask, and be curious, be open, and operate with genuine intent.
What a lovely summary, Jane. That was a lovely summary of the answer to your question. And we've actually got loads of questions coming into the Q&A, and I'm really conscious of time. So I'm actually going to use that as a lovely segue to jump us straight into the Q&As. Because I'm conscious of time. So we've got about 5 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out a question, and then Elle, Rich, Jane, if one of you would like to just sort of express an interest in answering it, then I'll fire it over to you. So the first question that we've had in is from Andrew, who has asked, how have you gone about bringing parity between neurodiversity and other protected characteristics? So they've said it often feels like when you're talking about inclusion in the workplace, resources and time still focuses on other protected characteristics like race or gender, with neurodiversity being seen as, in their words, the poor cousin. So I don't know if anyone would like to answer that. Someone needs to answer it.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, yeah, really important.
Thanks, Rich.
Really important question. I think, yeah, speaks kind of to the heart of building an inclusive kind of workspace. You're right. I think historically a lot of focuses and resources around inclusion have been centered around, yeah, kind of race or gender. And while those are kind of really important areas to address, I think sometimes that means that, yeah, neurodiversity and other characteristics haven't received maybe the same level of attention and investment, and therefore have been treated kind of, yeah, as you sort of say, as this kind of poor cousin, as you put it. But and I think that will, you know, that is already changing over time. I think because there's growing awareness of neuroinclusion and neurodiversity as a relatively more modern sort of social movement. But I think in my experience, kind of creating parity starts with acknowledging the gap and talking deliberately about kind of actions to close it. Yeah, basically doing exactly this, asking the question and addressing it kind of head on. And I think there's a couple of ways you can do that as an organization. So build awareness and education. You know, do people neuroinclusion and neurodiversity are quite long, complex words, and if you're not familiar, and they're in an area that can often be, I said at the start, I often sort of have a bit of a kind of disclaimer around terminology because, in the modern age, people are really worried to put their foot in it, and then in the middle of it, you've got some really complicated sounding words, and people just steer clear of it because they, I don't want to get this wrong, and it seems very sensitive. So actually building awareness and education in an environment, we talked about psychological safety, where people can actually talk about this stuff and question it and have meaningful debates and talks about it, I think is really important. And with that, from a leadership level, I think role modeling is really important. And I talk about the impacts of dyslexia and ADHD on me. I talk about other things that impact me kind of personally, and try and reflect that in my kind of leadership style, which then again puts people in a position where they feel they're able to kind of talk about the same things. It's very hard to expect somebody to open up and be vulnerable about something if you're not willing to do the same back. So that kind of role modeling is really important. But build awareness and education, and then embedding neurodiversity in the broader kind of inclusion strategies as an organization. Don't silo it as, oh, this is our just our sort of neurodiversity inclusion strategy. Embed it within the wider inclusion strategies, whether those are based on race or gender, but embed it as one, as sort of an inclusion for all kind of sort of strategy, and lead with that narrative, so it's kind of embedded in it and not seen as separate. That would be kind of my advice there.
Great. Okay, we have a question here from Susie, who's asked, how would you best approach educating, because we've talked a lot about education, how would you best approach educating senior leaders or founders who have shown a lack of understanding and sometimes even a prejudice towards neurodiversity? Unfortunately, that's something that Susie has experienced. And for that one, Elle or Jane, I'm going to invite you to answer that one.
And we've talked about this a lot, actually, throughout the call. And for me, it really goes back to that data piece. Data and education. There's a theme, isn't there, with what we've been saying? And to Richard's point a moment ago, and to my point right at the start of the call, this is a relatively new thing for people. Other protected characteristics, right, been around a lot longer. People have been focusing on a lot longer. And I think it really, really comes down to education and a desire to understand this topic. I would go in with data, and I would, again, talk about senior leaders. What do they care about? If it's numbers, if it's credibility, if it's what your competitors are up to, weave it into those things. It might not be a quick win. It might take time, but keep chipping away and focus it back to what your business, what your senior leaders want to achieve, and how they might be able to achieve it better through looking at things with a different lens.
Thanks, Hal. Right, one final question from the Q&A, and then we'll need to wrap up. This has really flown by the way. So this question is from Ellie. I hope I'm saying that right, Ellie. Have you considered how the application process, so before interview, disadvantages many neurodivergent people, and that there are rarely opportunities to ask for adjustments at that stage? So they've said CV writing is much harder for me as an ADHDer compared to being interviewed. But without a good CV or the ability to articulate skills and experience in a written format, they say they often miss out on the interview stage. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts that you could share around that for Ellie.
Yeah, no. First of all, Ellie, really sorry that that's been your experience. Because yes, it's not something that, I mean, completely open, transparent. It's not something that we've looked into in detail here, but I'm aware of obviously different sort of ways that we can change the way that we do that process by, videos, sort of like having sort of async and verbal, sort of like, rather than just relying sort of heavily on the written sort of forms. So at least I think we've moved away from application forms, which were horrendous, I think, for anybody to sort of navigate and to kind of pull together. With CVs, I mean, I would always sort of advocate contacting the company sort of like in advance to sort of say, this is something that I struggle with. Do you have any other, sort of alternatives that we can sort of like, that I can do in terms of getting my application across? But, it's something that maybe I can take this away and provide a bit more of a concise kind of like answer, because I understand it and I hear it. And it is very difficult to that at that stage, and I hear what you're saying, but I think sort of like the advancements in sort of like async and video, sort of in terms of actually putting those applications in is the way forward, but it's actually getting into the companies to get those to be sort of seen and heard. So yeah, I hope that helps, Ellie.
Valid point you make, Jane, around just like, if there's nothing formal in place, just even putting the question to the hiring team, you don't know if you don't ask, do you? Alison, I've just seen your question in the chat about getting access to the webinar afterwards. Yes, this is recorded and we'll share the email tomorrow afternoon, so keep an eye on your inbox. We've got 3 minutes left. Elle, Rich, Jane, you each have 10 seconds to share with me the one practical takeaway that you'd like the audience to remember from today's discussion. Jane, I'm going to start with you because you're up on my screen.
I'm actually going to repeat what I said earlier because it was my kind of like takeaway. So if you don't know, then ask, be curious, be open, and operate with genuine intent.
Lovely. Elle, over to you.
Mine would be to learn what is important to the people that you're trying to essentially pitch to. Find out what they care about, speak their language, and link it in with the things that they care about in the business.
The perfect summary. And Rich, your final thoughts, your practical takeaway for people on the call, please.
Yeah, I think mine would be very similar to Al's, in like move away from that kind of nice to have, warm fuzzy sort of notion of neuroinclusion, see and believe in the commercial application and benefits for your kind of company, because they're enormous. And and I think it does a huge amount for the movement as well, if we all think that way.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Jane, Rich, and Al, thank you so much for all of your contributions this afternoon. What a way to end the year. And for everyone watching, please message in the chat and thank all of the panel for such a really insightful session. In a moment, one of the team is going to post a link to the feedback survey, which I mentioned at the start, where you can request a certificate of attendance for the webinar if you would like one. If you enjoyed today's session and you found it helpful and valuable, please help us spread the word and tell people about these events. As I said at the start, there's over 2,000 people in this community now, which is awesome. So whether you're mentioning it to a colleague, forwarding an email, sharing it on LinkedIn, every bit of word of mouth helps build that community. And we're really eager to grow it to create just this really valuable network for people. So whether you're neurodivergent yourself, or you manage a team of people in an organisation and you want to better understand how to support them, please help us share it. It really is helpful for us. So this is the final webinar of the year, but before you go, don't dash off yet. I have a very exciting announcement for next year that I can finally share with you, which is the January 2025 Skill Session speaker. So Sarah Petherbridge will be joining us on the 16th of January, slightly later date than usual to allow you some time to get back into the swing of things after the Christmas break. Sarah's session is going to be all about hearing loss awareness, so a slightly different topic than what we've covered in recent months. So hearing loss awareness for your organisation and how to be a deaf-friendly workplace. And that's not all. February's session, we have the team from Not on the High Street joining us, and you can sign up for those events today. So keep an eye on your emails for all the updates. Take a peek at our events page on the CareScribe website to find out more information as well. And we're going to pop a link in the chat. So that is all for today, everyone. It went super fast. Thank you once again. Have a lovely Christmas if you choose to celebrate. And I will look forward to seeing you all in January next year. Bye, everyone. Thank you.